The map said the ridge ended in broken shale and vertical jungle. No passage, no trail, no reason to keep climbing. But our boots found packed earth anyway. Not mud, not roots. A firm, narrow line cutting through vines like a deliberate stitch. At first, we thought it was an old animal run. Then we saw the edges, too clean, too straight. The ground was tamped down in a way that felt worked. And every 50 yards, a stone marker sat half-buried, all the same size, all the same distance apart, like someone had measured the wilderness with a ruler. Our radios hissed with the kind of static you hear before a storm, except the sky was clear. The air smelled wrong, cold metal and wet limestone, like a cave breathing out. Birds stopped calling. Even insects went quiet, as if the forest had decided to listen. I told the team to mark our position. The GPS blinked, spun, and refused to lock. One of the porters pointed ahead and whispered a word I didn't understand, his face grey with fear. Then he crossed himself and backed away from the trail like it was a snake. We should have turned around. Every instinct screamed to cut our losses and retreat. But curiosity is a slow poison for explorers. It convinces you that the next bend will explain everything. The trail dipped beneath a curtain of hanging moss, and there, perfectly centered, stood a doorway carved into bare rock, impossibly smooth, impossibly tall, as if the mountain had been cut open with a single blade. And on the stone above it, freshly scratched, were markings that looked like warnings, written by someone who knew we were coming. The story you just heard is a fictional narrative created for entertainment. We didn't speak when we reached the doorway. Not because we were trying to be brave, because something about it stole the words right out of our throats. The jungle behind us felt suddenly far away, like we'd stepped off the real world and onto a stage built to imitate it. The stone was cold under my glove, too cold for the hour and altitude, and when I pressed my ear against it, I thought I heard a faint rhythm, like distant water or a heartbeat. I've led expeditions through whiteouts, deserts, and flooded ravines. Fear, I understand. But this was different. This was the feeling of being out of place, the way a trespasser feels when the owner is home and watching from the dark. One of my team asked the question nobody wanted to ask. If this trail wasn't on any map, who made it? Another answered in a whisper, maybe it wasn't made. Maybe it appeared. Before we go deeper, do 3 quick things, because it truly helps this channel reach more people who love survival and exploration stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Hit like if you enjoy these grounded, cinematic narratives, and comment the country, or even the city, where you're watching from. I read the comments, and it's incredible to see how far these stories travel. Now, understand this. An explorer's worst enemy isn't hunger or cold. It's certainty. The moment you believe you know what you're looking at, you stop seeing what's actually there. So when we finally stepped through that doorway, we weren't prepared for the first detail that proved, without argument, that the trail had led us to something that should not exist, and that whatever waited inside had been waiting a long time. We crossed the threshold like people stepping into a church they didn't believe in, slow, respectful, and somehow ashamed of our own curiosity. The doorway swallowed the jungle light almost immediately. Behind us, the green world still existed, still breathed, still held the wet heat of life, but inside the air turned thin and dry, carrying the smell of old stone and something sharper, like struck flint. My headlamp beams slid across walls that were too smooth to be natural, as if the mountain had once been soft and someone had pressed their palms into it until it hardened. I signaled the team to halt. We stood shoulder to shoulder, 5 of us who mattered for decisions. Me, Ethan Cole, the geologist, Dr. Lena Serrano, the field anthropologist, Rafi Singh, our logistics lead and medic, and Thomas Tom Varga, a quiet camera operator who had filmed storms, riots, and war zones without flinching. Behind them were 2 local porters who had agreed to come only because the pay could rebuild their roofs back home. Their eyes never stopped moving, as if they expected the rock itself to lunge. The entry passage was a corridor, not a cave. It held the straightness of design, narrow, slightly sloped downward, with a floor worn flat like a long-used stair. Every few meters, shallow grooves crossed the stone at the same angle. Ethan knelt, ran his fingers along one, and looked up at me with an expression that was half excitement, half alarm. "Tool marks," he said, "but not chisel marks. More like abrasion. Repeated passes. Something dragged across here for a long time." "People?" Raffi asked. Ethan's mouth tightened. "Or something heavy, something with a consistent width." Lena didn't speak. She was studying the walls, searching for patterns the way a doctor searches skin for a rash that gives away the disease. When she finally raised her light higher, her breath caught. There were carvings, faint at first, then clearer as we moved deeper. Not decorative, not religious the way temples are. These were diagrams, repeating figures in sequence, like instructions, a shape like a person, then a curved line, then a circle that resembled an eye. Over and over, in a rhythm that made my skin prickle. "Warnings?" Tom murmured, already filming. Lena shook her head slowly. "No," she said, "not warnings, rules." That word, rules, hung in the corridor like smoke. We walked another 50 yards, maybe more. The jungle outside was now only a distant rectangle of green, already shrinking behind the bend of the entrance passage. I told myself that was fine. We had rope, radios, a sat messenger, enough water for a day, and enough discipline to turn back if needed. We were professionals. We weren't kids in a haunted house. Then the radios hissed again, not a burst of static, not interference. It sounded like breathing. Raffi stopped, lifted his handheld closer to his ear, and frowned. "It's picking up something," he said, "but it's not on our channel." I took mine, scanned frequencies. The hiss followed me. No matter what channel I turned to, it stayed, threaded beneath the noise like a whisper you can't quite make into words. "Kill them," I said. We switched them off. The corridor immediately felt less crowded, like we'd stopped talking in a room where someone else had been listening. The silence was profound. Not the normal quiet of stone and distance, but a silence so complete it made our own movements feel obscene. Our boots scuffed, our packs creaked. Each breath sounded too loud. The corridor opened into a chamber without warning. One step I was in a tight passage, the next I was staring into a space large enough to hold a cathedral. My light caught the floor first, dark, polished stone, reflective like obsidian. Then the walls, which rose in an oval curve. And finally the ceiling, which was so high my beam couldn't find the top. In the center of the chamber stood something that didn't belong anywhere on earth. At a distance it looked like a pillar. But as we approached, the shape clarified into a ring. An enormous stone ring standing upright, like a doorway inside the doorway. It was perhaps 12 feet tall, thick as a man's torso, and carved with the same symbols we'd seen in the corridor. The stone around it wasn't fractured the way rock would be if someone had bored a hole through it. It was seamless, as if the ring had grown from the floor. And there was something else. The air inside the ring looked different, not like shimmering heat, not like fog, more like a faint distortion, as if the world behind it had been smudged. Tom stopped filming for the first time since we'd entered. His mouth opened slightly, and the camera lowered in his hands like it had become too heavy. Lena stepped forward, slow, her light sweeping the carvings. "This is not a tomb," she said. "It's not a shrine." "What is it?" I asked, though my throat felt tight. She didn't answer right away. She was looking at the floor. The polished black stone around the ring was scratched. Not random scratches, but arcs, semicircles, repeated, overlapping, like something had been pulled around the ring over and over, leaving marks. Ethan crouched again, measuring the arcs with his gaze. "That's a radius," he said quietly. "They were turning something." Raffi swallowed. "Turning what?" As if in reply, My headlamp caught a detail at the base of the ring, a metal latch set into the stone. Not rusted, not ancient-looking. It was clean, almost new, and shaped like a lever. In a place where nothing should exist, there was a lever. No one moved. Our instincts formed a silent coalition. Do not touch it. Do not give this place the satisfaction of reacting to you. But Tom, who had filmed his whole adult life for the moment when reality gives you something you can't explain, Tom stepped closer. "Tom," I warned. He didn't look back. His eyes were fixed on the ring, on the distortion within it. The camera in his hands wasn't recording. The red light was off. He had forgotten it, like a man forgetting a prayer because something more powerful has taken his attention. He reached out. His fingers hovered inches from the lever, and the chamber, which had been dead silent, answered with a sound so low we felt it more than heard it. A vibration in the floor, a tremor in the air, like a giant animal shifting its weight somewhere beneath us. Rafi's voice came out raw. "Don't." Tom's hand stopped. He pulled it back as if burned, and his face went pale. "Did you feel that?" he whispered. I did. My teeth were buzzing faintly the way they do near high voltage. "We're leaving," I said, forcing the words like a command to my own fear. "We mark this chamber, we back out, we come back with—" The distortion inside the ring pulsed, just once, like a breath. And in that instant, my headlamp beam caught something behind it that made my blood run cold. Not a wall, not more chamber, a landscape. A different space entirely, darker, wider, with a faint blue cast like moonlight on snow. It was there for less than a second. Then it snapped back to the smudged blankness. Lena's voice shook. "That wasn't—" Ethan finished for her. The excitement drained from his face. "This mountain!" I stared at the ring, my mind trying to force logic onto it. Hidden cavern, optical illusion, mineral haze. But my stomach knew the truth before my brain would admit it. We hadn't found a trail. We'd found a route, a passage designed to take something from one place to another. And judging by the scratches on the floor, it had been used. I took a step back. "Nobody touches anything," I said. "Tom, turn the camera back on." "Ethan, samples only from the corridor walls, nothing from the ring. Rafi, check the porters. Lena—" I turned to see Lena frozen in place. Her light was pointed at the far wall, away from the ring. "What is it?" I asked. She didn't answer. She lifted her hand slowly and pointed. On the wall, in a section we hadn't noticed at first, there were newer marks, sharper, less worn. Not carved deep like the old symbols. These looked like scratches made in a hurry. They formed letters, not the old script, not pictographs. English. Tom stumbled closer, filming again, his breath loud in the silence. The words were crude, uneven, like someone had used a rock or a knife on the stone. "Don't turn it, it hears you, it learns." Under that, a final line, even messier, the letters slanted downward as if the writer's hand had been shaking. "We are not alone in here." The chamber seemed to tighten around us. The air tasted metallic again, and that low vibration returned, stronger this time, rippling up through my boots. Somewhere, inside the mountain, or inside that ring, something responded to our presence. And then, behind us, one of the porters let out a small, strangled sound. We all turned. He was staring at the entrance corridor we'd come through, the passage that should have been empty and silent. But in the darkness beyond the chamber, just at the edge of our headlamp reach, something moved. Not a person, too tall, too smooth. It crossed from one side of the corridor to the other, with a quietness that felt impossible, like a shadow that had learned to stand upright. Tom's camera shook as he zoomed, trying to catch it. Ethan muttered a curse under his breath. Rafi raised his flashlight like a weapon. "Back!" I ordered. "Back to the chamber wall. Lights together. Nobody—" The distortion inside the ring pulsed again. This time, it didn't stop. It expanded slowly like an eye opening, and from within that shifting air, a sound emerged. Not a growl, not a voice, but a pattern of clicks and breaths that made my skin crawl because it felt interested. Like something tasting the moment. The chamber had been dormant when we arrived. Now it was awake, and whatever the ring connected to was waking up with it. The first thing I did was count heads again, because fear makes you doubt your own eyes. 5 of us, 2 porters, 7 beams of light converging on the corridor mouth like a jury trying to decide whether the darkness was guilty. The shape had moved fast, too fast for something bulky, too smooth for something human in heavy gear. But a second later the corridor was empty, and the mind did what it always does when it can't explain. It tried to bargain. "Could have been your shadow," Ethan said, though his voice didn't believe it. "My shadow doesn't have shoulders," Raffi replied, and I heard his medical calm crack. Tom kept filming, zoomed in so far, his camera hunted for focus and found only grain. "Say something," he whispered. Not to us. To the corridor, like a man trying to coax an animal into showing itself again. "Don't," Lena said sharply. "That's the point, it hears you." I snapped my gaze to the English scratches on the wall. "Don't turn it. It hears you. It learns." "Everybody quiet," I ordered. "Hand signals only." In the silence, the low vibration rose again, subtle, rhythmic, almost like the floor had a pulse. When it peaked, the distortion inside the ring widened until the air within it was no longer a smear, but a window you couldn't trust. My light caught that other place again, a slope of pale rock under a colder light, and a dark line that might have been a river or a crack. Then it blurred. "Back out," I mouthed, holding up my hand and curling it toward me. We moved as one unit along the chamber wall, careful not to step onto the polished floor near the ring. Each footfall felt too loud. The porters stayed tight behind Raffi, eyes wide, their hands clenched on their straps like that could anchor them to the world. At the corridor entrance, I stopped. I didn't just look. I listened. Nothing. No breathing in the radio, no clicks, no whisper of movement. Just the faint, stubborn tremor under our boots. I signaled forward. Tom in the middle, Ethan and Lena behind, Raffi guarding the rear with the porters between us. If this was a cave with bad air or an unstable roof, we could handle it. If it was something else, human or animal, we needed to stay together. We stepped into the passage. The temperature changed immediately. It dropped a few degrees, enough to tighten the skin on my neck. My headlamp beam caught those same grooves across the floor and the smoothness of the walls. But now, walking back the way we came, the corridor felt longer, stretched. The jungle light that should have been visible around the bend was gone. I kept moving, faster now, but not running. Running makes sound, and sound felt like a mistake. Ethan leaned close and whispered anyway, barely a breath. "Where's the daylight?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to admit what my eyes were already telling me. The corridor had no exit. We reached the point where the passage should have turned and opened to the green rectangle of jungle, and it didn't. It simply continued, the same slope, the same smooth walls, the same clean stone, as if the mountain had decided to add another mile while our backs were turned. Tom's camera light flickered, then steadied. He swallowed hard. "That's impossible." Lena's face was pale in the cone of her lamp. "Or we're not going the same way." I raised my hand. "Stop." We all froze, breath held. I tried to remember every curve, every step. Had the corridor always been this straight? Had I imagined the bend? The mind will rewrite a memory in seconds when panic floods it, and for a moment I couldn't trust my own recollection. Raffi stepped forward, touched the wall with 2 fingers like a blind man reading Braille. His voice came out low. "This isn't rock," he said. Ethan snapped his head. "What?" Raffi took a small penlight from his pocket and shone it at the wall from an angle. Something shimmered, so faint I wouldn't have seen it without the crosslight. A thin film, glossy like varnish. Ethan scraped it with his knife. The blade made a soft squeal, and a tiny curl of translucent material peeled away. Plastic, We stared at it on the knife edge, all of us thinking the same thing and refusing to say it first. "Someone lined this," Ethan whispered. Lena didn't look surprised, she looked sick. "To control sound," she said, "or to control what the stone does when sound hits it." The floor tremor surged suddenly, stronger, as if it had been waiting for that scrape. My teeth buzzed. Tom flinched and nearly dropped the camera, and from somewhere ahead, far down the corridor, a faint clicking answered, measured and patient. Not a drip, not a bat. Clicks in a pattern. Rafi's eyes widened. He pointed at my radio clipped to my strap. It was on. I hadn't turned it on. I watched the little screen glow weakly as the speaker hissed, and beneath the hiss came a sound that turned my stomach cold. A faint imitation of my own breathing, slightly delayed, like an echo that was learning the rhythm. I reached for it, snapped it off, and the hiss died, but the clicking ahead continued, now a little faster, like something adjusting. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We moved back the way we'd come, but the corridor behind us wasn't reassuring either. It felt like being trapped inside a throat. The walls swallowed light. The air grew drier, thinner, and the smell of flint returned, stronger now, like something had been sparked to life. When we re-entered the chamber, the ring was no longer passive. The distortion within it held steady, and in it I could now make out shapes, vague at first, then clearer as our lights hit at the right angle. A slope, a dark sky, snow maybe, and a line of vertical forms like trees, except there were no leaves, just thin spikes standing in rows. The porters began whispering prayers under their breath. I didn't stop them. At that point, it felt as practical as any other tool we had. Tom swung his camera toward the English warning on the wall, filming it again, and then he froze. The scratches were changing. Not like letters being carved in real time, we didn't hear scraping. But the wall looked different. The final line, "We are not alone in here," had new marks beneath it, shallow and fresh. Tom leaned in until his lens nearly touched the stone. The new marks formed 3 words, uneven but unmistakable. "You brought light." The chamber. Tremor swelled, almost pleased. Ethan's voice broke the hand signal rule in a rush. "That's a message." Lena grabbed his sleeve. "No, that's a response." I looked at the ring again and felt a prickling along my arms, as if my skin could sense the air moving toward it. The distortion didn't ripple like heat anymore. It pulled, subtle but steady like a current. "We do not touch the lever," I said, and for a second I was speaking more to myself than the team. "We hold position, we rest, and we plan. If the corridor has shifted or looped, we need markers. We need—" One of the porters, Miguel, the younger one, made a strangled sound and pointed at the floor. At the edge of the polished stone, near the ring's base, a thin line of moisture had appeared. Not water from a drip. A line that was moving, crawling like spilled mercury. It flowed toward our boots, then stopped just short, as if it had reached an invisible boundary. It trembled there, reflecting our headlamps in warped slivers. Rafi crouched, trying to stay calm. "Condensation," he muttered, but his tone didn't fit the word. The moisture rose, not up a wall, not against gravity, but upward into a thread, like a bead being pulled by static. The thread stretched toward the ring's center, then snapped back, and the bead fell, splashing silently. Tom's camera captured it all. His hands were shaking so hard the image would later look like an earthquake. Ethan backed away. "Electrostatic effect," he said, desperate to label it. "Humidity, charge differential, infrasound." The ring pulsed. The window flickered, and for an instant something moved inside that other landscape. A silhouette. Tall. Too tall. Narrow shoulders, long arms, head slightly bowed. It was standing on the far side of the ring like a person pausing at a doorway, studying the room we were in. Tom gasped. Just a little sound. A reflex. The silhouette snapped its head up, and the sound in the chamber changed. The vibration sharpened into a faint whine, barely audible but painful in the bones. as if the air itself had been tuned to our bodies. Raffi clapped his hands over his ears. Lena staggered, one hand against her mouth. Ethan's eyes watered instantly. I forced myself to breathe slowly through it. "No sound," I mouthed again, though my own jaw ached from the pressure. Tom, pale and sweating, kept the camera trained on the ring, and I saw his lips moving soundlessly, naming what he was seeing, begging it to stay in frame. The silhouette took one step closer to the ring's interior surface. The distortion thickened, and for a moment the edge of the ring looked wet, like a film stretched tight. Miguel, the younger porter, made a decision that still haunts me. He bolted. He didn't run toward the corridor. He ran away from the ring, away from that window, back into the passage like a man sprinting from a fire. His footsteps slapped loud against the stone, and the sound hit the chamber like an insult. The wine spiked. Miguel screamed, not words, just pain, and stumbled as if something had yanked the air out of his lungs. He crashed to his knees in the corridor mouth, clawing at his throat. Raffi lunged after him. I grabbed Raffi's packstrap and held him back, not out of cruelty, but because I saw what Raffi didn't. As Miguel's scream echoed, the ring's distortion surged outward like it was drinking the sound. The silhouette inside the ring lifted its head higher, as if scenting. Miguel's scream cut off mid-note, not because he chose to stop, because Miguel was no longer there. 1 second he was kneeling, choking, hands on his neck. The next, the corridor mouth was empty. No body, no drag marks, no fall, just absence like a trick of the eye. Silence slammed into us so hard it felt physical. Tom whispered without meaning to, "Where did he go?" The ring answered. The distortion cleared just enough to show the other side again, and now, small in the far landscape, was a figure on the ground, flailing in snow, the pale of his hands bright against the dark. Miguel was alive, but he was somewhere else. I felt the first true surge of panic in my chest, hot and animal, a portal, a mechanism, a trap. Raffi started forward again, eyes wild. I held up my hand, shaking my head hard. "No," I mouthed. "Not yet." Behind the porters, the older one, Javier, began sobbing softly, his shoulders shaking. Lena turned her back to the ring and pressed her forehead to the wall, whispering prayers in Spanish, then in something older, maybe learned from her grandmother. Ethan stood with his knife still out, ridiculous against whatever this was. Tom's camera lens stayed on the ring, and I watched the silhouette inside it shift again, closer now, as if drawn by the commotion. The English warning on the wall suddenly felt like it was written directly to me. It hears you, it learns. We had brought light, we had brought sound, and now we had brought it a person. I forced myself to think like a leader again. "Raffi," I said quietly, breaking my own rule because we needed the clarity, "check oxygen, check CO2, now." Raffi blinked hard as if waking. He fumbled his meter from his bag, hands trembling, and held it up. The numbers were normal, no bad air, no hallucination excuse. Ethan took a step toward the ring, stopping at the boundary where the polished floor began. "If it's a field, electromagnetic, acoustic, whatever, then the lever might control it," he said, voice tight. Lena snapped her head up. "That's what they warned us not to do." "And Miguel just got taken anyway," Ethan shot back, "so the warning didn't protect him." The silhouette inside the ring moved again, now so close that its outline filled the window. It wasn't detailed. No face, no eyes I could make out, just a shape darker than the dark behind it. But I felt, deep in my gut, the sensation of being watched by something that didn't understand kindness. Tom whispered, barely audible, "It's coming through." I stared at the lever, clean metal, a human-made piece of hardware in a place that shouldn't have any. If it was a control, we needed it. If it was bait, touching it might be the last mistake we ever made. The ring pulsed once, and the chamber's low tremor became a steady, building hum, like a generator spooling up. Miguel's distant screaming carried through the window now, thin and muffled, like sound traveling through a long pipe. It wasn't constant. It came in bursts, panic, then silence, then panic again, as if whatever was on the other side was deciding when we were allowed to hear him. Javier dropped to his knees. "Please," he begged, looking at me, not at God. "We go back. We go back now." I looked at the corridor we'd tried to escape through, endless, shifting, lined with a strange film, and then back at the ring where a man was dying in snow beyond reach. My job was to keep the living alive. But leaders don't get the luxury of clean choices. The hum climbed higher, and the lever gave a tiny metallic tick all by itself, as if the machine beneath the mountain had sensed our indecision and decided to choose for us. I stepped forward, slow, keeping my breathing steady. I held up my hand to the team. Lights down. No voices. Tom's camera followed me. My glove closed around the lever. It was colder than ice. And as my fingers tightened, I felt something on the other side of the ring press back, like a palm against glass, matching me. Then the distortion snapped into perfect clarity, and the silhouette leaned forward, close enough that the boundary between worlds looked thin as skin. Miguel's scream cut off, and the lever under my hand began to move, pulling itself downward with or without my permission. The lever didn't drop like a switch. It slid with the slow insistence of something heavy finding its groove, as if the mountain had been waiting for a hand, any hand, to complete a circuit. My glove squeaked against the metal. The hum deepened. Not louder, but fuller, like a room filling with water. For a heartbeat, the ring's surface looked liquid, not shimmering, moving with purpose, drawing itself taut. I tried to stop the lever. It kept going. Then the pressure in the chamber released all at once, and the air snapped cold enough to sting my nose. The window inside the ring sharpened into brutal clarity, a slope of wind-packed snow under a dark sky, dotted with those thin, leafless spikes we'd mistaken for trees. They weren't trees, they were stone, narrow columns rising in neat rows like ribs. Miguel lay on his side in the snow, arms wrapped around his head. His mouth opened and closed without sound reaching us. He was alive. He was also alone, surrounded by a landscape that felt like it had never belonged to the earth we'd left behind. And the silhouette, so close a moment ago, was gone. The chamber's tremor softened into a steady pulse again, almost satisfied. Rafi exhaled like he'd been holding his lungs shut. Lena's eyes were wide and wet, fixed on Miguel. Ethan stared at the lever in my hand like it had just betrayed him personally. Tom kept filming, but his lens drifted as his hands shook and the camera's autofocus hunted in panic. "Hand signals," I mouthed, forcing control back into my body one muscle at a time. I pointed at Rafi, then at Miguel in the window. "Can you stabilize him if we get him back?" Rafi nodded once, sharp, then he pointed at the ring's surface and drew a line across his throat. "We go through, we might not come back." He wasn't wrong. The boundary looked thin as skin, but skin can still be a wall if you don't know what's on the other side. Lena stepped closer to the English scratches, scanning like a woman reading the last signs on a sinking ship. Her lips moved silently. Then she pointed hard at the first line. "Don't turn it," and below it the newest message, "You brought light." She looked at me, anger and fear braided together. "It's reacting," she said softly, unable to keep the words in. "We're teaching it." I wanted to argue. I wanted to pretend there was a clean protocol for this, but Miguel's body in the snow was the only reality that mattered. I looked at Tom and gestured, "Keep filming, but lights low." Then I pointed at Ethan, "Anchor rope." Ethan hesitated a fraction of a second, then snapped into action. He pulled out our climbing rope, looped it around a stone outcropping on the chamber wall, and built an anchor with the kind of speed that comes from years of training and fear. He clipped in a carabiner, then held up the line to me. Rafi tugged on his gloves, checked his medical kit and pointed at himself, then at the ring. He was going. "No!" I mouthed. Rafi's eyes flashed. He jabbed a finger at the window where Miguel's chest rose in ragged bursts. Then he jabbed the same finger at me. Leader, choose. I hated him for being right. I cinched my harness tighter, clipped the rope to my front, and tightened my grip until my knuckles ached. I looked at Javier, the remaining porter, who was shaking so hard his teeth clicked. Stay, I said quietly, even though speaking felt like dropping blood into water. Do not move. Do not touch anything. Do not call out. Javier nodded, crying silently. His hands pressed together like prayer could become a wall. The ring's pulse continued. It felt patient now, like it had all the time in the world. I stepped forward. The boundary resisted at first, not like a solid surface, but like pushing through a membrane in water. It pressed cold against my gloves, against my sleeves, against my face. For a split second, the sensation was so wrong my body tried to reject it. My stomach lurched, my ears popped violently, the air tasted like pennies. Then I was through. Cold hit me like a punch. Not normal mountain cold. This was a dry, penetrating cold that went straight to bone. The sky above was black-blue, with a faint glow along the horizon, like a world stuck in permanent twilight. Wind moved across the slope in long, invisible sheets, carrying fine ice crystals that stung my cheeks. The rows of stone columns stood in disciplined lines, stretching away until they vanished into a haze. Each column was no thicker than a fence post and twice as tall as a man. They were too regular, too evenly spaced, like someone had planted them. Between them the ground was hard, crusted snow with dark rock showing through. Miguel rolled toward me, eyes wide with relief. His lips formed words I couldn't hear over the wind. His hands clawed at my jacket as if to confirm I was real. I touched his face with my glove. Quiet, I said anyway, even though he couldn't understand the rule that mattered most. We're getting you out. He tried to stand and nearly collapsed. His movements were sluggish, the early signs of hypothermia, shock, exhaustion. His breathing was shallow, rapid. I tugged him close, looped an arm around his shoulders, and signaled toward the ring behind me, now a bright oval of warmer light in the darkness. Through it, I could see the chamber, small and distant, as if I was staring through a long tube. Rafi and Tom stood there like figures behind glass. Ethan held the rope, braced, face strained. Rafi lifted his hand, palm down. Slow. I nodded and began to move Miguel toward the ring. That's when the stone columns changed, not physically, at least not at first. But as we passed between two rows, I noticed the wind shifted. The fine ice stopped skimming across the ground. The air became still in a way that didn't match the open landscape. Miguel's grip tightened on me. He pointed past my shoulder, eyes bulging. I turned. Between the columns, far off but moving fast, something slipped from one line to the next. It wasn't running across open ground. It was moving along the rows, using the columns as cover, appearing for an instant, then gone, then reappearing closer. Tall, narrow, too smooth. It moved like it didn't need to hurry because it already knew the outcome. The cold on my skin suddenly felt less important than the heat in my chest. I pulled Miguel faster, boots crunching loud on the snow crust. The ring's oval grew larger. I could see Rafi leaning forward, ready to grab us. Tom's camera was locked on the window, its red recording light a tiny, furious dot. Then the landscape around us answered. A click sounded to my left, not wind, not ice. A deliberate sound. Close. Miguel whimpered, and in the same instant the clicking returned, repeating his sound, delayed by half a second, like an echo with intention. From behind a column, something leaned out. It wasn't fully visible, just an edge of shape, a suggestion of limb. But the way it held itself was wrong. Too upright, too calm, like an animal that has learned to imitate a person to get closer. Miguel made a choked sound, and the thing clicked again, matching him. I felt my own breath catch, and the clicking matched that too. It hears you. It learns. I forced air out slowly through my nose, then drew a breath in without noise. I tightened my arm around Miguel and hissed a whisper right into his ear, close enough he could feel it, even if he didn't understand. No sound. Not a word. His eyes flicked to mine. He didn't understand, but terror translated. We kept moving. The ring was only 20 feet away when the pressure returned. The same bone-deep whine we'd felt in the chamber, except here it vibrated through the snow itself, rattling inside my skull. Miguel cried out involuntarily. The click that answered was immediate. From the row of columns behind us, the tall silhouette stepped into open view. It was not an ape, not a bear, not any creature I could place in the tree of life with comfort. It had the posture of a human, but stretched. Long arms hanging nearly to its knees, torso narrow, head slightly too small for its height. Its surface wasn't furred, it wasn't scaled. In the low light it looked like wet stone or dark skin pulled too tight. Where a face should have been, there was only a subtle curve and a faint ridge, no eyes I could see, yet I knew it was looking right at us. It lifted one hand, not in aggression, not in greeting, in imitation. It opened and closed its fingers slowly, the way Miguel had clawed at my jacket. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't hunting us like an animal hunts. It was studying us like a tool studies a user. I shoved Miguel forward the last few steps, and we hit the ring's boundary. This time it resisted harder, as if the membrane had thickened. I pushed, and it yielded just enough for my shoulder to break through. Warmth from the chamber hit me like a fever. Rafi grabbed my sleeve, hauling. Miguel's body snagged against the boundary, his jacket pulling tight. He screamed, pure panic, and the membrane stiffened like muscle. The tall thing behind us clicked sharply, and the whine spiked. Rafi shouted something, lost in the noise, and yanked harder. Ethan pulled the rope, feet digging into the chamber floor. Tom's camera swung wildly, then refocused on Miguel trapped half in, half out. Miguel's scream stuttered, his eyes rolled. The boundary clenched around him. I did the only thing I could. I stopped fighting it. I went still. No sound, no frantic movement, no struggle to feed it. I pressed my face close to Miguel's and held his eyes with mine, forcing calm into him like a transfusion. My mouth formed one word, slow. Breathe. He tried. His scream became a shuddering inhale. The boundary loosened a fraction. Rafi understood instantly. He stopped yanking and instead guided Miguel with steady pressure, inch by inch, as if easing someone through a tight crevasse. Ethan eased the rope tension to keep it from jerking. Tom held the camera steady, breath held, eyes wide. Behind us, still on the other side, the tall thing stood at the edge of the ring, close enough now that its outline filled the cold window. It tilted its head. The motion was almost curious. Miguel slid free in a final sudden release, and the membrane snapped back like a rubber sheet. We fell into the chamber in a heap, me, Miguel and Rafi, breathing hard. Miguel sobbed into Rafi's shoulder, fingers white on his jacket. Rafi immediately checked him, hands moving fast but gentle, looking for frostbite, for shock, for injury. Ethan stumbled backward, staring at the ring like it might lunge. Lena rushed forward, grabbing my arm, checking my face with frantic eyes. "You're alive," she whispered, as if she couldn't trust reality anymore. Tom kept filming, then swung his lens to the English warning again. The wall had changed. New scratches sat beneath "You" brought light, as if carved by an impatient hand while we were gone. The letters looked fresh, pale against the dark stone. "You brought him back," and beneath that, even messier, as if written in anger, "Now give us more." The chamber's hum deepened again, and the lever, still in its lowered position, gave another tiny tick. Miguel curled on the floor, shaking violently. Rafi covered him with an emergency blanket, the crinkling sound painfully loud. Miguel flinched at the noise like it hurt. Lena grabbed my sleeve, voice low. "It's bargaining," she said, "or demanding." The messages, The timing. This isn't random. Ethan shook his head, eyes glassy. It can't write English. Tom's voice came thin. Then who did? Nobody answered because the worst possibility was already forming in all of us. Someone else had been here. Someone had survived long enough to warn the next fools. Someone who might still be here, somewhere in the mountain, listening. I forced myself to kneel by Miguel. His lips were blue. His fingers were stiff. His eyes darted constantly, as if he was still seeing those columns in his mind. "Tell me," I said gently, ignoring every rule about sound, because we needed information more than we feared attention. "What happened on the other side? What did you see?" Miguel swallowed, throat bobbing. He spoke in a hoarse rush of Spanish, words tumbling over one another. "Stones, lines, like graves," he said, "and people, not people. They hide. They click like birds. They repeat you. They follow the noise." Rafi glanced up at me, grim. "He's hypothermic and in shock," he said quietly. "We need warmth, sugar, and time. And we need to get out." Lena stared at the corridor, our only physical exit, and her face tightened. "We tried," she murmured, "and it changed." Ethan rubbed his eyes, then pointed at the lever. "If it's on, maybe it can be turned off." Lena's voice hardened. "And what if turning it off closes the ring with someone halfway through again? What if it locks us in this chamber with whatever's awake now?" Tom panned his camera slowly across the chamber, and when his light swept the far side, we all saw it at the same time. A second doorway, not the one we came through. Another, smaller, lower, almost hidden in shadow. Its edges were sharp, and the stone around it was darker, stained as if by old smoke or old hands. Next to it, etched into the wall, were more symbols, and below them a human mark, faded but clear enough to read, "Safe room." My mouth went dry. Ethan moved toward it immediately, drawn like a moth to any sign of structure. Lena grabbed his arm and yanked him back. "No!" she hissed. "Nothing here is safe. That word is bait." But Javier, the porter, was staring at the safe room doorway with a kind of desperate hope. Hope is dangerous in places like this. It makes you rush toward the first promise you see. The chamber's hum rose again, and the ring's distortion flickered, just once, as if something on the other side had shifted closer. The outline of the tall figure appeared for an instant, then vanished, leaving the window empty and cold. Miguel whimpered and pulled the emergency blanket tighter around his shoulders. I stood, every muscle tight. The safe room doorway might be shelter. It might be a trap. The corridor might lead out, or lead nowhere forever. The lever might be control, or a trigger, and somewhere in the mountain, someone had scratched English warnings, as if they'd been waiting for us for a very long time. I stepped toward the smaller doorway, slow, keeping my light low. As I approached, the air changed again, warmer, stale, like breath trapped behind a closed door. I reached out, not touching yet, and felt something I couldn't explain, a faint draft pulling inward, like the room beyond was inhaling. Then, from behind the stone of that doorway, a sound came, so soft it could have been imagined. A human cough. I froze. It came again, followed by a whisper so faint I barely caught it, but the words were unmistakably English. "Don't let it hear you. Urdi." And then the voice added something that made the blood drain from my face, because it wasn't speaking to us as strangers. It spoke like it had been expecting us specifically. "It's already learned your names." The whisper came again, closer this time, like it was sliding between the stones to reach us. "Lights down," I mouthed, more urgently than I meant to. My own voice felt like a flare in that chamber. Tom's camera light dimmed. Ethan lowered his headlamp until the beam kissed the floor. Lena's hands were already shaking, but she complied. Rafi kept one palm on Miguel's shoulder, steadying him as the porter trembled under the emergency blanket. I leaned toward the smaller doorway marked "Safe Room," keeping my face out of the direct beam. "Who are you?" I asked as softly as I could. A pause. Then a cough again, dry, controlled, as if the person behind the stone was trying to cough without making a sound. The whisper returned. "Not safe," the voice said. "Nothing safe. But it's quieter in here. You have to breathe like you're already dead." The words crawled under my skin. "Open it," Ethan whispered before catching himself, horrified that he'd spoken. The chamber responded with a subtle swell of vibration, as if it had felt his voice and approved. I shot him a look that could have cut rope. Ethan shut his mouth and swallowed. "Tell me your name," I said, "because names are anchors. Names make someone real. And how you know ours." The answer didn't come immediately. When it did, it landed with the weight of exhausted honesty. "My name is Miles," the whisper said. "Miles Hart. And I know yours because you said them in the corridor. You said them near the walls. The walls repeat. The walls carry." Lena's eyes widened. She mouthed it back at me. "The walls carry." Miles coughed once more, then continued. "You came in with a porter named Miguel. You have a geologist. You have a medic. You have an anthropologist. And you have a man filming because he thinks if it's recorded, it's contained." Tom's face tightened like he'd been slapped. Miles's whisper softened further. "It's not contained." I took one step closer to the doorway, not touching it yet. "How long have you been in there?" A long silence. The kind that makes you feel time moving around you. "Long enough to forget what day means," Miles said. "Long enough to understand the rules. And long enough to know you're in danger right now, because it's awake." The ring's hum deepened like a throat clearing. Raffi looked from the ring to me, then back, his eyes asking the question he didn't dare say out loud. "Do we trust this voice?" I made a decision, because indecision was feeding the mountain. "I'm opening it," I said quietly. "No sudden movement, no shouting. If something moves, don't react. Don't give it sound." I placed my glove on the edge of the smaller doorway. The stone felt warmer than it should have. Not warm like sunlight, warm like skin. I hated that. There was no handle, just a seam in the rock. I found a shallow notch near the bottom, and when I pressed, something clicked. Not from the door, but from somewhere deeper, like a lock answering across a distance. The seam widened a hair. Air leaked out, stale and human. I slid my fingers in and pulled slowly. The stone door didn't swing. It slid aside with a whispering grind that made my jaw clench. The sound felt dangerous. I held my breath until it stopped. Behind it was darkness, not open chamber darkness, tight darkness. A narrow room carved into the rock, just large enough for 2 people to sit. The floor was littered with crumpled foil wrappers, empty water pouches, and a torn notebook. And in the far corner, hunched like an animal conserving warmth, sat a man with a beard grown wild and eyes too bright to be healthy. Miles Hart raised one finger to his lips, but he didn't shush us with sound. He just held the gesture like prayer. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp. A headset radio lay beside him, smashed. His hands were stained dark, fingers raw. On his wrist was a frayed climbing strap tied like a reminder. He stared at us, then past us to the ring. His eyes widened in immediate fear. He mouthed one word with frantic urgency. "Close." I slid the door back a fraction, leaving only a narrow gap to speak through. "Talk," I whispered. "Fast." Miles swallowed, licked cracked lips. "You turned it," he mouthed more than spoke. "You turned the ring." "Yes," I said. Miles's eyes flicked to the English scratches on the wall. "Those were mine," he whispered. "Not at first. At first I wrote them in my own notebook. Then the walls started writing back." A cold heaviness settled in my gut. "Writing back? How?" Miles's laugh was a breathless, joyless thing. "The mountain isn't a mountain. It's a device, or a structure, or a prison. I don't know which, but it responds to sound and light. It responds to attention. The more you give it, the more it gives you, just enough to keep you here." Ethan leaned in, unable to resist. "What is the ring?" Miles's gaze snapped to Ethan. "Don't say it," he whispered. Don't name it. Names become handles. Ethan closed his mouth, shaken by the intensity. Miles pointed a trembling finger at the corridor we'd entered through. The trail was a lure. It appears when it wants people. It can fold space inside, make the corridor longer, loop it, erase the exit. It did it to us, my team, 4 of us. His eyes went distant, and for a second I saw a man watching something replay endlessly behind his eyelids. We tried to leave, Miles said. We shouted, we argued, we used radios. We used light like idiots, and every time we made noise, it got smarter. The walls began repeating our words back to us in the corridor, delayed, like a child mimicking. Then it started changing the repeats, altering them, testing. Tom's camera dipped. His lips parted, silent. Miles's finger shifted toward the ring. When it learned enough, it took my partner, Naomi. Not by dragging her, not by attacking her. It convinced her. It used her voice. Lena's hand flew to her mouth. Miles nodded slowly, eyes wet. We heard Naomi calling from the corridor. We ran toward the sound because we loved her, but Naomi was already gone. The voice was the mountain. It had sampled her. It wore her like a mask. The chamber's hum rose again, as if offended by the story being told. Miles's eyes flicked to it, fear sharpening. It hates being understood. It hates being named. It doesn't want you to solve it. It wants you to interact with it. Rafi whispered, barely a breath. Miguel got pulled through without touching the ring. Miles' expression tightened, because he screamed. The ring listens for peaks, panic, pain, sudden noise. Those spikes give it leverage. It can pull across them. I felt the memory of Miguel snagged in the membrane, the way the boundary tightened around his jacket when he screamed. Miles's explanation snapped into place like a lock. "Can we turn it off?" Ethan asked, unable to stop himself. Miles stared at him. "I tried," he whispered. "We turned it up, down, halfway. Every change made it respond, like it wasn't a switch but a dial, like you're not turning it off. You're tuning it." My fingers tightened on the edge of the smaller doorway until my glove squeaked. The squeak felt like a crime. Miles flinched at the tiny sound. He lifted his hand again. Quiet. I nodded, then asked the one question that mattered. "How do we leave?" Miles stared at me like I'd asked how to outrun the ocean. "You don't leave the way you came," he whispered. "The corridor won't give you the exit again. Not once it knows you want it. It will keep offering you corridors that feel familiar, but they lead deeper. It tries to make you walk until you stop resisting." A slow dread curled in my chest. Miles pointed to the wall beside him inside the cramped room. Carved into the rock, half hidden behind his shoulder, was a set of symbols I hadn't seen before, different from the corridor diagrams. And beneath them, a rough map scratched in charcoal. The chamber, the ring, the corridor, and another line that branched off from the far wall behind the ring. "There's a service passage," he whispered. "Small. Hard. It goes down. I found it by accident when I got thrown." "Thrown," Lena mouthed. Miles nodded, eyes haunted. "Naomi was taken through the ring. I tried to go after her. The boundary rejected me, and I woke up in a lower tunnel, bruised like I'd fallen from a cliff. It doesn't always want to take you. Sometimes it moves you, like a piece on a board." He swallowed hard. "That lower tunnel leads to a place with old air vents, a crack to the outside, not a door, a wound in the mountain. But you have to move without feeding it. No radios, no arguing, no names, no bright lights. And when you reach the lower tunnel, you do not look back at the ring." The ring's hum deepened, and I felt it in my sternum, like something pushing from inside my chest. Miles's eyes widened. He pressed his palm flat against the stone beside him, as if trying to listen through it. "It's listening right now," he whispered. "It's learning the word leave." I felt the blood drain from my face. Rafi shifted his weight and Miguel whimpered, the blanket crackling. The sound bounced in the chamber. The hum answered immediately, tightening into a faint whine that made my teeth buzz. Miles's whisper sharpened into urgency. "Close the door," he mouthed. "Now!" I slid the stone panel shut until it sealed with a soft click. The moment the room was closed, the chamber's whine softened again, as if the mountain had lost a piece of information it was trying to capture. Miles had been right. Even tiny sounds changed its behavior. I turned to the team and forced my hands to stop shaking long enough to signal, "We have a route. Quiet. Down." Ethan nodded, jaw clenched. Lena's eyes were wide but focused. Raffi looked exhausted already. Tom held his camera up again, then hesitated, as if suddenly ashamed. I stepped close to Tom and mouthed, "Camera off." Tom's eyebrows rose in protest. He gestured toward the ring, toward the wall writing, toward everything. This was the footage of a lifetime. I stared at him until he understood what mattered more than footage: breath. Tom swallowed and clicked the camera off. The chamber immediately felt slightly less charged, as if the mountain's attention had been tied partly to that steady recording light. We gathered our gear with minimal movement. Raffi lifted Miguel carefully, keeping him wrapped, his own body a shield against the cold stone. Javier, the remaining porter, clung to the wall, eyes fixed on the ring like it might swallow him whole. I glanced at the ring and my stomach tightened. The window was still clear, but the landscape beyond had changed. The rows of stone columns were closer now, as if the other side had moved nearer to the boundary, and there, between the columns, the tall silhouette stood again, perfectly still, head slightly tilted, like it was waiting for the next lesson. I refused to look longer. We moved toward the far side of the chamber, to the place Miles's charcoal map suggested the service passage began. The problem was, the passage was behind the ring. To reach it, we would have to cross the polished obsidian floor. The same floor covered in circular scratches, the same floor that seemed to conduct the hum like a nerve. I held up my palm. Stop. I scanned the floor for any sign of a boundary, like the one that had held the moisture bead back. Nothing obvious, but the air felt different closer to the ring, slightly colder, slightly heavier, like invisible pressure. I made the call with my hands, single file, lights low, no talking, slow steps, no running. We started across. Every footstep felt amplified. The obsidian didn't absorb sound, it returned it clean and sharp, like clapping in an empty hall. The ring's hum responded to each contact, not as a spike, but as a subtle adjustment, like the system was measuring our rhythm. Halfway across, Miguel coughed. It was small, involuntary, human. The hum sharpened instantly, the ring's window flickered, and for a split second the chamber behind us looked wrong, stretched, as if the air had become glass and was bending our shapes. Raffi froze. He held Miguel tighter, urging him with eyes alone to stay still. The hum settled back down, but something had changed. I felt it like a shift in the room's gravity. The English scratches on the wall, visible even from here, seemed darker now, as if the grooves had deepened. And then, without any hand carving, a new line appeared beneath. "Now give us more." The letters were slow, deliberate, like the stone was remembering how to form them. "You are going down." My heart hammered once, hard enough that I feared the mountain could hear it. Lena saw it too. She staggered a fraction, then caught herself. Her face said everything. It knows. Ethan's eyes snapped from the message to me. His fingers twitched near the rope, like he wanted to anchor us to something in this chamber that would not move. I forced myself forward. Behind the ring, the wall curved inward into shadow. There, almost invisible unless your light hit at the right angle, was a seam narrower than the safe room door. A slit in the rock, like a maintenance access in a place that shouldn't have maintenance. I placed my glove against it, searching for a notch. Behind us, Javier's breath hitched loud in the silence. I turned slowly and saw why. The ring's window was no longer showing only the cold landscape. It was showing our chamber too, like a reflection within a reflection. And inside that layered image, the tall silhouette stood not among stone columns, but just behind us, in the chamber's copy, watching us from an impossible angle. It wasn't crossing over. It was learning how to be here without being here. I felt my mouth go dry. I mouthed to the team, barely daring the movement, "Do not look at it." But Tom looked. A reflex. A human mistake. His eyes met the window, and in that instant the hum snapped into the familiar whine that rattled bone. Tom clutched his temples, knees buckling, his lips parted, and a sound escaped him, a single strangled syllable, not even a full word. It was enough. The ring pulsed hard. The air inside it bulged outward like a lung exhaling. And from the membrane a hand began to press through, long-fingered, dark, impossibly calm, pushing the boundary as if it were soft clay. Rafi's eyes went wide. Lena stumbled back, then caught herself against the wall. Ethan grabbed the rope, bracing. Tom tried to scream, but I lunged and clamped my glove over his mouth before sound could become disaster. His eyes were wild, tears streaming from the pressure of the wine. He shook under my hand like a drowning man. The hand pushed farther through the boundary. Then it paused, fingers flexing, testing the chamber air. The wine softened into a low, satisfied hum, as if the mountain had learned a new setting. I pressed my forehead close to Tom's and held his gaze, forcing him to breathe through his nose, slow and silent. He nodded, barely. The hand withdrew slightly, as if reconsidering. And then the English on the wall changed again, a new line forming beneath. "You are going down. We can follow." I found the notch in the seam and forced my shaking fingers to press. The slit widened just enough for my shoulder. Cold draught poured out, smelling of deep rock and damp rot. The service passage was real, but as I pulled it open, the hum surged once more, and the ring pulsed so hard the chamber light seemed to dim for a heartbeat. Behind my back, the membrane bulged again, not with a hand, with a shape. A head-like curve pressing through, slow and patient, as if the boundary had become easier now that it had tasted us. I didn't look. I didn't allow myself the luxury of seeing it clearly. I shoved the service passage wider and signaled the team through, one by one. Javier first, trembling. Lena next, eyes fixed on my hands. Ethan after her, rope in his grip like a lifeline. Rafi maneuvered Miguel carefully, muscles straining. Tom resisted, rooted by fear. I grabbed his harness strap and pulled him forward. He stumbled into the slit, and I followed last, forcing myself not to glance over my shoulder. As I slipped into the service passage, the air behind me changed. Warmer, charged, like a storm building inside a room. The stone slit began to slide shut on its own, grinding with that same whispering sound, sealing us away from the chamber. For one breath of relief, the hum became muffled. Then, from the other side of the closing stone, a voice came, soft, perfectly shaped, almost tender. My voice, calling my name. And it didn't come from the corridor. It came from inside the wall, inches from my ear. "Don't go," it whispered, using my exact tone, my exact pacing, as if it had practiced while I was asleep. The stone sealed with a click. We stood in darkness, packed into a narrow passage that sloped downward, the air cold and wet. Ahead, deeper in the mountain, something clicked once, measured, patient, answering my stolen voice like a partner in conversation. And in the silence that followed, I understood the worst part. We hadn't escaped the chamber. We had brought it with us.